it's the institution he's been running. There's an inane debate going on in the press now about who should be the next head of the IMF, as if we were discussing who should run the local milk board. But if we took the idea of human equality seriously, if we remembered all the people who have been impoverished and starved and killed by this institution, we'd be discussing the establishment of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission and how to disband the IMF entirely and start again. You know, if DSK is guilty, I suspect I know how it happened. He must have mistaken the maid for a poor country in financial trouble. Heads of the IMF have, after all, been allowed to rape them with impunity for years.
My nights always begin with some lies, always end up with soft lights. They never told me so. I wish I knew how to behave like a human. Oh, and I wish I knew more than my father before me.
On a more cheerful note, at the end of each podcast, I talk about something I have loved since I last spoke to you. I've just been travelling for the past month and a bit in the US, working on various stories that you'll hear over the next few weeks. One was an interview with the disgusting, crazed pornographer Larry Flint, which you can read on the Independent website. Unfortunately, the audio, I didn't have the swanky microphone for the podcast here. The audio isn't really good enough to use as a podcast, but look it up. He's such a disgusting human being. Those of you who read my interview with Kenneth Tong, I thought I would never interview someone I disliked more than Kenneth Tong, but no, Larry Flint, it turns out, is that man. And I got a brilliant email from him last night calling me a creepy little slime ball, and it said, my colon is full of chunks of little men like you. And then I got an email 10 minutes later from his secretary saying, could you disregard the last email we sent you, please? Which I thought was delightful. Okay, some things I've loved since... if you want to read that interview, just Google my name and Larry Flint. It'll be the first thing that comes up. Some things I've loved. Well, for me, there's no greater joy than discovering a really big, beautiful bookshop. And there are 3 amazing bookshops that I wanted to plug. Not that they need my help, they're all quite famous, but I just want to talk about how much I love them. There's the Strand Bookstore in Manhattan, which I have a daydream that time stops for 100 years and I can just sleep in the Strand Bookstore and work my way through everything. It's one of the biggest bookshops in the world. There's 18 miles of books, and it's just an awesome and beautiful place, and it's full of lovely Manhattanite nerds. I went there with my new friend Charles Bock, who's an amazing writer. He wrote the book Beautiful Children, and it's just such a source of joy. Then City Limits in San Francisco, it's the famous Beat bookstore, is absolutely gorgeous. I also want to recommend one here in Britain. I was just at Hawaii Literary Festival. We're going to be using the audio of some of the interviews I did on stage as podcasts, and the Cinema Bookshop in Hawaii. I mean, Hawaii itself is basically a small town on the Welsh border that is dedicated towards secondhand books, and it's just a beautiful and joyous place. But I particularly like the Cinema Bookshop there. I also want to recommend a film that I saw, and I also want to get your advice on something. I saw a film just after I got back at the, it used to be called the National Film Theatre. It's meant to now be called the BFI South Bank. I can't quite make that adjustment. A film called Deep End, which is a kind of rediscovered cult film from the late 60s or perhaps the early 70s, about a teenage boy who works in a swimming pool and becomes obsessed with this woman. It's one of those beautiful, strange, hallucinatory films from that period of British cinema. I always thought the dumbest thing Francois Truffaut ever said is, there's no such thing as British cinema and there's no such thing as French theatre. He thought that Brits couldn't do cinema. Actually, I love the British cinema of that period of the 1960s and 70s. Some of my favourite films, Blow Up, Peeping Tom, If. You could give me that over the entire Nouvelle Vague any day. And that's not a nationalistic point. There's lots of things I love about France, but the that really annoys me. Obviously, one of the other things I don't love about France is Dominique Strauss-Kahn. But so this film, Deep End, can't recommend it highly enough. I hadn't even heard of it until it was re-released, but it's absolutely haunting. I just wanted to get your advice on an etiquette question, right? I find it really annoying that in cinemas now it's become absolutely normal for people to just sit there and text all the way through the film. And one of the good things about the BFI South Bank is it's slightly wanky, arty cinema where that kind of thing is frowned on. So they don't sell popcorn even, for example. But there was a woman sitting in front of me at Deep End who was eating a bag of crisps, and she was eating them incredibly slowly and incredibly loudly. And the manner of a 90-year-old colonel in a 1970s sitcom, leaned forward and said, "Madam, you're eating your crisps very loudly," or something. And the people around me, half of them looked really encouraged and agreeing, and half of them looked horrified. And I just want to know, was I within my rights to ask her to not eat crisps, or was I being out of order? I'm not sure. My friends are divided. Please give me your feedback. Anyway, if you want to let me know, you can email me at the most narcissistic email address in the world, johan@johanhari.com. Until next time, you can follow me on Twitter at www.twitter.com/johanhari101. I now implore you to head to Twitter and Facebook and anywhere else and tell all your friends to immediately subscribe to this podcast, or you will impose an IMF structural adjustment program on them that will result in their horrific death. Thanks very much. Bye.
This podcast was produced for The Independent by The Dot Pod and features music from Years and Years and Laura Hawkin. If you want to hear more, go to facebook.com/yearsandyears or laurahawkin.com. If you want to ask us a question, then just tweet us at The Dot Pod.